Evening, you lot. How's it going? I hope your little journey into CB radio is going quite well. It's dark outside, as you can probably see there, and I've got a couple of minutes spare, so I thought let's go over this, because although I'm not necessarily doing this series of CB radio for beginners in any kind of order, well, maybe I am a little bit, but I keep getting asked questions about burners. People want to know, how can I hook a burner up to my radio? And a burner, in case you didn't know, is just an amplifier. What it does is it amplifies your signal. So your radio is putting out 4 watts. It will amplify it, depending on the size of the burner. But for example, the one that I've got over there, you put 4 watts into it, you'll get about 55 out, 55 watts out. So, you know, you're getting a bit of extra power. It is worth noting, because there'll always be people that are going to say, you're not allowed to use burners on CB radio. Well, actually, I'll correct you there, my friends. The law doesn't say that you can't use a burner. The law says that you're not allowed to use more than 4 watts. So, technically speaking, if you was to use the amp to get 4 watts, you're within the law. I know, that's not going to happen, because there's no way you'd get only 4 watts from an amp. I mean, probably most amps will only be triggered by 0.4 might trigger it. I don't really know. There'll be some geeks that would comment and say the least amount of power that an amp will be triggered by. But you need a certain amount in order to key the amp. But if you had a radio that was doing about 0.2 watts and you put it into an amp and it generated 4 watts out, you're legally using that amp, alright, because it's no more than 4 watts. But we're not going to get into that kind of stuff. What you do with the amp is entirely up to you. I can tell you how to wire it up. So, this is extremely crude and basic. This is my current radio setup that I've got. Car battery to radio, meter, and an amplifier there for the purposes of showing you how to do it. So, if you want to know how to wire up an amp, you need to remember the sequence. And the sequence is as this: radio, coax, into amplifier. Now you'll see RTX and ANT. Alright, ANT is obviously antenna. RTX is, well, the radio. That is the power going into the amp. Amp comes out and goes into meter. That is so that you can measure the amount of power that you're transmitting with. And then this would be antenna, but I've got the dummy load in the back. So that is what you do, and obviously you have to supply some kind of electric to the amp, so that also goes to your power supply. Now, just quickly to touch on powering an amp. When you put in a radio and an amp, or even just a radio, in a car, the best way is to go straight to the battery. Yeah, plug it through a little grommet in the firewall or whatever, under the bonnet, straight to the battery like I have here. Don't go plugging it and splicing wires in your ignition and all this kind of stuff, because you could run the risk of getting interference into your radio. But also, them wires and fuses may not be able to handle the amount of amps that the amp is going to draw and the radio will draw. Don't ask me how many amps that's going to draw. I don't know off the top of my head. What do you think I am? I don't know that. This particular amp is an EA150. Well, it was an EA150. It's not anymore. It will do about 150 watts if you stick 10 watts into it. For the purposes of this, Thunderpole T800 does 4 watts. We're going to put 4 watts into this amp, and we're going to see what comes out with the meter. So you need to power the burner. Now, when you're powering it, you've got to remember that it is going to draw a significant amount of amps. So if you're in a car, you need to make sure that you power it in such a way that there's no fuses in line that are going to not be able to take that amount of amps, because you're just going to be blowing your fuses left, right and centre. Now, there is a fuse on the wire for the amp. You need to make sure there's a fuse. Yeah, there's my fuse there. because if anything was to go wrong, you want to protect your amp. These transistor amps, they are very finicky and touchy, and the smallest spike or something like, well, not the smallest, but a spike in electric or any issues can blow it up. It will stop working. Anyway, there we go. I think I've said enough about that kind of stuff. So you've got your amp wired up to your battery, hopefully. Your radio's on your battery, hopefully. And remember the sequence, yeah? Some people like to go backwards. Some people like to think the antenna, and then that goes to the side on the amp, that goes out to the radio. But I don't. I work the other way around. My head works the other way around. I go radio, and I follow the path. Signal, okay? Signal has to go into the amp. It can be amplified, blah, 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 and then it comes out, follows that wire, it goes into the meter, and then we can see how much we're actually getting, and then after we've metered it and looked at it, it then goes out and gets radiated into the world. So there we go. Let's turn on that. Doesn't matter where you are, whatever channel you want to do. Obviously there's 40 channels, so that's halfway, so we could go there. We've got dummy load in, so we're not expecting to hear anybody. So let's see what we get without the amp turned on. Then we put it on the 20 watt scale because we want to be able to read 4 watts. And we key up. There we go. There's around about 4 watts. Might be a gnat's cock under. Alright. So that's 4 watts coming out the radio. So now we need to put the scale up, because otherwise we'll bend the old needle. And then we simply turn on the amp. Make sure we got it on AM, FM, SSB. All SSB does is it adds a bit of a delay, because single sideband, there is a small, there is a carrier, but how can I explain this to a beginner that doesn't really understand? The modulation, your voice, is what drives the radio. That's what brings out the power. With AM and FM, well, AM as such, you have a dead carrier and then your voice. But with FM, you key up and the carrier is with the audio as soon as you key. Minion just said, do I want to go and play Fortnite? Oh, I do. Anyway, so FM, your carrier and your key is right there, but with sideband it doesn't. So when you have an amplifier, you put it on you put it on SSB, and there's a delay with the key and D key of the amp, which will allow for the fluctuation in your voice going up and down as you speak. Otherwise, if you have it on FM and it doesn't have that delay, it will be keying and dekeying the amp, but you're still speaking. I don't know if that really was going to make sense to you, but when you start playing around with, that was a crane fly, daddy long legs. When you start playing around with sideband and things, you'll understand what I've just said. But let's forget about that for now. So anyway, we turn on the amp, and then we're going to key up and see how many watts we end up with. That's actually about 50. The battery, I mean, that battery is probably going a little bit dead, so that's probably going to be part of that. But there we go, about 50 watts. Don't forget, we're on the 200 watt scale now. So 2000 is 200, 1000 is 100, 500 is 50, 100 is 10 watts. 50 watts. So what we've done is we've made our 4 watts into 50 watts. Now, it is worth pointing out that a lot of people seem to make the mistake, and I suppose I was guilty of it when I first learned how to do this kind of thing. But I did quickly realise, and you will as well, that it's all very well you hooking up a burner and getting your signal out there a little bit further, because it will just push your signal out. Whereas if you've got 4 watts, imagine your signal coming out the antenna and just going woo, woo. You know, you put an amp behind it, gives it a bit more, you know what I mean? It like throws it out a bit further, amplifies it. So you might be doing that. So other people further away will be able to hear you now and clearer. But if you can't hear them coming back to you, what's the point? So you need to think about this kind of thing. It's not just, oh, I'll plug that in and I'm going to have the best setup in the world. I'm going to be hearing everything. No. You can get preamps. That's a different video, but you can get preamps. And what they do is they amplify the signal coming into you. So you can amplify your signal going out and amplify a signal coming in. You can get burners with them built in and all that kind of stuff. Perhaps I'll do a whole video on preamps. But they're only really useful for sideband, not really FM, because also it brings in noise. But then you got filters and things. It's a minefield. Anyway, hopefully I've helped you now. You're so eager to learn how to wire up a burner. There we go. A couple of tips. If you've got one of these burners, don't key up for too long. They get very, 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 very hot. The more power you run, the hotter they get. They will melt inside. They will stop working. They won't last very long. The RM brand is notorious for it. You can wire up a fan on the top there to keep it as cool as possible, suck the hot air out of it. That's why I've got a little hole in the top of mine, just above the pill there, to try and keep it as cool as possible, because it isn't what it used to be. Can't really think of much else that a beginner would need to know, but there we go. If you really want to do it, now I've shown you how to do it, enjoy yourselves, wouldn't you? And be responsible with it. Even though these days you can't really interfere with too many things, I suppose. Yeah. See you later. All the best. Take care.